Good evening and welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark. If you're new here, this radio show and podcast dives deep into the shadows of Saskatchewan's past to learn what lies within. Sometimes we even go to other locations across Canada to chat about dark history, mysteries, urban legends, and sometimes even the odd monster. I'm your host, KD Kulpa. I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher here in Regina, Saskatchewan. I love digging into the past to bring life to ghosts and monsters hiding in the dark. And I especially love going live with you every week to tell you what I've uncovered. Now, last week we had the pleasure of having Carrie from the Regina German Club joining us. She told us about the paranormal activity that they have in the building and gave us some insights into who might be haunting the place. I thought it would be fun tonight to dig into the history of that location, especially given that the Regina Riot happened so close by. So tonight we are going to be traveling back in time here in Regina to uncover the history of the area surrounding the Regina German Club. Who knows? Maybe we will gain more insights into who might be haunting the building beyond just past patrons and founders. Okay, in case you missed last week's episode, which I highly encourage you to go back and listen to if you did, as it did give me a lot of goosebumps while recording, we're talking about the area around the Regina German Club tonight. So the Regina German Club is a local clubhouse that celebrates German culture. It was formed in 1955 and moved into its current location in 1968. They host public and private events, including singing, dancing, learning a new language, drinking beer, eating pretzels, and more. I mean, what else do you need, right? The German Club is located near downtown Regina on St. John Street. So I did some digging into the area of the Regina German Club after we talked last week with Carrie. She had given us some of the paranormal activity that they're experiencing and kind of, gave us some insights into who that she thinks might be haunting the building. At one point, this area was known as Germantown, like a big section, given the high number of German families living in the area. However, as Carrie mentioned during our discussion last week, there was also a high number of other European settlers in the area, so Ukrainian families, etc. And given that next door to the Regina German Club, there's also the Ukrainian National Federation Auditorium. This kind of goes to show you that there were multiple types of European families living in the area. This second building, the Ukrainian National Federation Auditorium, was built before the German Club, as it was built in 1931 for the Prosvita of the Canadian-Ukrainian Institute. And according to the Regina Heritage Society, it was also used as the Calvary Evangelical Temple from 1941 through 1950. In the Regina Club area specifically, it looks like it wasn't really used for anything until about 1914, when the Dosh and Fiesel Pool Room was listed as the owner of the location in one of the old Henderson's directories for Regina. If you don't know what the Henderson's directories are, they are amazing things to tell you kind of what was at different addresses at different years, and they go back into like late 1800s, and I think they go up to 1960s somewhere. Great resource if you're ever looking into history. Anyway, I checked a few years prior to that 1914, and I could not find a listing for the address of the German Club. So my guess, and this is a complete guess, as there's, it's hard for me to know for sure, is that there was no building there yet. Unless, we can find some old maps that are from 1913, it would be hard to say. So around the area was primarily residential. You can tell from the addresses, it was mostly family homes nearby. Many different names were listed with the German Club's address over the years after that 1914. So it was, like I said, it was a pool room. Then it was also a barber for a short period of time. It was also a motor school and a motor vehicle repair shop. It was also a paint manufacturing company for a while, and even became a neon products company, which eventually got taken over by a national neon company and expanded, is what the newspapers say. I don't know what the building would have looked like at the time, but apparently they had been according to the article I found from Regina Leader Post back then, they were planning to expand to add offices and things. They had bought 2 more lots and they were going to expand. So it must have been a commercial space right from the get-go, just within the residential area. So this would make it a potential target of vandalism during the Regina Riot in 1935, as we will discuss in a little bit here. Quite a few stores and businesses at that time had to replace a lot of windows following the riot, which is what we'll talk about here in a minute. Although digging into the history prior to the current building at that address, which, as we've heard, was built in 1968 or kind of around then, it sounds like the German Club owned the location for longer than that. I found the German Canadian Harmony Club and the German Harmonic Club listed at the location in 1965. A notice of the club's application for a liquor license for the location was in the Regina Leader Post in August of 1963. And in 1961, it simply said Harmonica Club as the owner of the building in the Henderson's directory. So I'm not sure if that would still be the German Canadian Harmony Club or if this is a different Harmonica Club. I couldn't really tell because they never actually wrote the full name. However, I did find a newspaper clipping from the Regina Leader Post for November 19th, 1962, stating that soccer teams were using the Harmony Hall at that location for an annual meeting. So it's possible that this was the German Canadian Harmony Club, since, it was called the Harmony Club and they took over in 1961 or maybe 1963. And then built the new building in 1968. Unless, I don't know. Like I said, it's hard to tell because they did just use Harmony Hall for a while. So I don't know if that would mean it was a different club or the same club. It's hard to say for sure without digging into old city records. I don't know. As you can tell though, the area was surrounded by quite a few houses owned by different families. But given that it had different types of businesses within the building at that address, it's hard to say if anything happened there that would cause a haunting specifically. It might instead be that the families from Germantown or the Ukrainian counterparts might just enjoy the area, particularly given that this is now a lively location that celebrates both the German and Ukrainian cultures. However, let's talk about the Regina Riot, as it did happen near the German Club location. So the businesses and houses on St. John Street were likely impacted directly by the riot and the angry mob that followed. On July 1st, 1935, the front page of the Regina Leader Post Bulletin had a large headline saying, "Police, Strikers, Clash in City Streets." It was on this day that the police surrounded Market Square, which at that time was around the 1600 block of Saskatchewan Drive, to put a stop to the Ontario Trekkers. You can tell the article was written as quickly as possible to get a bulletin out, as there was no real sentence structure and there's a lot of mistakes. So you're going to have to forgive me as I read you a small piece of the article. So this first newspaper article goes on to say, "Numbers injured when sticks and stones fly in Market Square fight. 1 striker dead, tear gas used, rioting in streets. An unknown number of persons were injured in the Market Square tonight when mounted and city police clashed with strikers. The strikers called the mass meeting in the square. It was growing dusk. Suddenly, there were blasts on police whistles and the mounted police swept in. Men and women shrieked. The police came in from the east side of the square on foot. Women fell as the crowd swept towards the west side of the square. The strikers were all scattered in the crowd. There were stones and sticks flying in all directions within the space of a few seconds. Most of the people cleared the square rapidly. Within a minute, the streets and square was in an uproar. From all sides, the battle raged. The mounted police were using their riding crops. People were trampled underfoot as the crowds kept coming back and forward." The article goes on to talk about the use of tear gas from both sides, and that 1 striker was reported to have died before 9 o'clock. Another man, which was reported to be a policeman in civilian clothes, was said to have his face covered in blood and was making women scream. In case you have never heard of the Regina Riot, it was during a time in 1935 when the Depression was sweeping across the provinces. There were many Depression-era camps set up for those that were unemployed at the time, called unemployment relief camps. It was reported that 1,500 people were living in these camps in British Columbia, and they were angry at the poor condition of the camps. On June 3rd of that year, more than 1,000 of the camp residents decided to strike against Ontario and take their strike to Ottawa to face the government. It was at this time that the trek to Ontario started, with all of these strikers jumping onto trains and making their way east. If you look at the pictures from the time, you can see that the train cars were crawling with people. Like, those who couldn't fit within a train car simply sat on top of it instead. So I mean, like, hundreds of people sitting on top of the trains as it's moving across the provinces to go east. It was reported that they had reached over 2,000 strikers by the time they reached Regina on June 14th, 1935. So they were picking up people as they went. Before the trekkers, as they were called at the time, had reached Regina, the government had put out a call to the mounted police in Saskatchewan to stop the trekkers at Regina and refuse to let them back on the trains to continue their trek to Ottawa. The Prime Minister, R.B. Bennett, and the federal government didn't want these strikers to reach Parliament to do their protest. And in particular, they didn't want them to reach Winnipeg, which apparently Winnipeg was considered a very easily, pulled together group to protest the government because there was a lot of unrest there. So they really didn't want this strike or this protest to pick up even more steam once they hit Winnipeg. So they said, no, it has to stop in Regina. So this is what instigated the attack on Market Square in Regina after the strikers had to spend a couple of weeks camping out and trying to decide what to do next. They were no longer being allowed on the trains to travel, so they needed to come up with a plan. Apparently, the mass meeting that was called on July 1st in Market Square was by the leaders of the strikers at that time that were in Regina. The public meeting was to update everyone on the movement's progress, and it was reported that up to 2,000 people attended the meeting, but they figure only approximately 300 of the attendees were actual strikers. Most of the attendees were actually expected to be civilians, which is likely why the reporter of the Regina Leader-Post was in such a hurry that night. When you review the newspapers from around that time, it looks like there were camps for strikers set up in Lumsden and Moose Jaw, and it was reported in the Leader-Post that some of the strikers had even started their way back to British Columbia after being fed up with the poor treatment by the government and police in Saskatchewan. Second and third bulletins were issued on that night, same night in July, so July 1st we're still on, as the Leader-Post tried to keep the city population up to date with what was happening after that initial riot took place. So the second bulletin announced 2 dead in riot. The article originally written was pushed down and this was added on top. At least 20 injured, City Detective Miller and striker killed. Bricks fly in fight along 12th Avenue. 1 striker dead and 20 persons injured was the outcome of the mounted police and strikers' clash in the Market Square. Detective Charles Miller was killed outside the police station. The name of the dead man was not known. Among other injured were 4 mounted police officers, 2 city police officers, and 2 strikers. Emergency calls were sent for doctors and ambulances. The fight was still going on in the city streets. 1 old man, whose name could not be immediately known, had his face split open. A woman broke her leg while she was trying to run away. So apparently the fighting was still going on, and cars were being used to block roads. During the time of the riot, it was reported that mounted police had also surrounded Unity Center, which it sounds like this was an area that the strikers were using to camp, so it was kind of considered their headquarters, and it was a couple miles away from the Market Square. Apparently, 1 striker had been taken to the hospital with bullet wounds. Strikers were trying to run down 12th Avenue to get away from the fight that was happening in front of the Grand Theater. Then a third bulletin was issued that night as well, updating the numbers that the second bulletin reported. Now the headline read, "Nearly 100 injured during riot battle." Now the claim was that only one was dead, the police officer. I did read a couple of articles, that came out much later, like more recent articles, that said that the striker's death was forcefully removed from records by the mounted police at the time. I don't know if that's why this striker's death was removed in this third bulletin or if there's another explanation. I do find it interesting that in, the few days after, all of the injuries and, anything else, so like pictures of injured people, were all police or mounted police. There was nothing talking about civilians. There was nothing talking about the strikers that were hurt. It was only pictures of police. So it does kind of make you think that the police were starting to take over the reporters area, or like what they could report on. But anyway, I don't know for sure. I wasn't living then. I can't tell you, for certain. But the reporter at the time did mention it was impossible to collect the names of all the injured, as police were warning everyone to get off the streets at that point. The way these bulletins were coming out, it makes you think that someone was like running back and forth from the riot to the newspaper's office to update everyone, then running back to the riot to get updated information and take pictures. Unfortunately, it was in this bullet that we find out that the strikers also decided to start throwing rocks and bricks at shop windows along the areas where the fighting occurred. Thousands were reported to still be roaming the streets late at night, even though police were warning everyone to stay in their homes so that no one else would get hurt. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of businesses that were located in the vicinity of the riot, because this was considered, kind of the business area of Regina at the time, were majorly impacted by the angry mobs and mounted police in the streets. As the mobs ran from the police, it was reported the next day that there was thousands of dollars in damages to businesses in the area. The headline on July 2nd, 1935 said, "Property damage $25,000 in clash." Later, the dollar value went up, saying Regina businesses would be claiming up to $4 million in insurance needs after the riot was over. It looked like many people were blaming the police, as no one understood why they chose a peaceful mass meeting on Canada Day, or back then known as Dominion Day, to attack, especially when the headquarters of the strikers was miles away from the business and residential district that the police chose to attack. The mounted police were blaming the city police for the bullet wounds, and it looks like there was a lot of blaming going on all around, to be honest. Nobody wanted to take responsibility for what happened that day. Reading the papers, you could tell the government didn't want to take responsibility for the actions of the mounted police, but the mounted police also didn't want to take the blame, so they were blaming the city police. So it sounded like the strike was winding down at this point because the strikers, couldn't get onto trains to Ottawa. They were running out of steam after already having to spend 2 weeks stuck in Regina or Lumsden or wherever it was that whatever camp they were staying at. So unfortunately, in this case, it was the Regina businesses and citizens that took a lot of the damage because of that day, leading to many broken windows, damaged cars, including even an ambulance getting damaged as it was rushing injured to the hospital. From what I can tell, there were never any major tragedies associated with the area around the German Club, which makes me agree with Carrie's thought that perhaps the ghosts the ghosts that are tied to these clubs and the cultural history behind the location, like that's why the ghosts are actually there. They're just directly tied to that location or that area. There was a time that the newspapers reported the address as the Regina Communist Headquarters, which sounds like it's related to the unemployment clubs and protesters that were rising up in the 1930s. Because I think that was around 1931 that it was mentioned that this was a headquarters for that type of activity and that they were going to be leading protests and, kind of meeting in that area to then go and protest in Market Square because it was so close. So maybe it's just, maybe this address that Regina German Club is and the Ukrainian building next to it, it just currently resides in an area that was primarily used as a meeting point for people to gather. Whether they were gathering to protest or, gathering just to have fun. It just seems that the area was a place to gather, or I guess even to learn, because remember, there was a motor repair shop that was also kind of in the area. And that motor repair shop also ran, also taught things. So it was also for learning there. It was for repairing things. It was for learning. It was to have fun, especially with the Ukrainian National Federation Auditorium built in 1931. The two buildings side by side have been used by the community to gather for large events for, a really long time. So it doesn't surprise me that those from the area's past want to continue to gather at large events in the German club. That's why they've been doing it for almost 100 years. Like, can you believe that? Almost 100 years. That just is crazy. The energy and cultural influence of the German club events is likely a pull for the ghosts in the area to come and hang out and, enjoy the events, enjoy the culture, and just have a good time. So there you have it. Tonight, we dug into the past of the Regina German Club area, trying to uncover the secret lives behind the ghosts that are known to haunt it. I think I agree with Carrie's assumption that we talked about last week, indicating that the ghosts are likely residents either from Germantown or even from the club's past, like the club founders or, some of the big club members. And maybe they're just wanting to relive the enjoyable gatherings they attended while alive. This would also explain why the ghosts are not hostile or trying to cause problems. They just want to be part of, the fun, the enjoyment, the big events, the music. To be honest, I don't blame them. I might have to join them in some of these celebrations, in fact, in the coming spring and even, into Oktoberfest. I honestly can't wait to go back. But what do you think? Given the history of the area, given that this location was, a meeting point or a place to gather for so many years, it was a pool room, it was a place to learn, it has been a harmony club, a harmony hall. It was, a place for protesters to gather during the unemployment time. So it is a very popular meeting point. And probably if we dug into the history of the Ukrainian auditorium as well, we would probably see that it was also used as a popular meeting point for many years. So that just kind of goes to show you that you don't have to have tragedy in order to have hauntings. Sometimes it's just a favorite place that, some ghosts want to revisit after they're gone. I don't know. What do you think? Thank you for joining us tonight. Did you know I have a weekly newsletter that includes a link to the latest episode of ParaGhoul Paranormal? Subscribers also receive updates about upcoming events, behind-the-scenes information, and subscriber-only updates related to upcoming book releases. As I said, I am a horror author, book signings, and more. If you are interested, make sure you head over to my website at kdkulpa.com to sign up. If you'd like to support the show and any potential on-location adventures, I'm hoping we have one coming up here soon, you can find me on most social media platforms under KDKULPA. I also have a Patreon for those that want behind-the-scenes information, extra content, and a chance to join a live Q&A with me each month. And each month I'm also adding full video access to our interviews with guests on the show, as well as weekly live chats with me called the Weekly Shadow Lounge. Now, I'm really excited for next week's episode, as we will be returning to our historical paranormal cases. So if you haven't listened before, I typically try to bring in some history into the paranormal industry and, the gadgets being used. So check out past episodes if you want to learn more. But next week, we're going to do something a little different again. I found this interesting case from Eastern Canada, and I'm calling it the Donnelly Homestead Massacre. Now, apparently, this all happened back in 1880, approximately 25 kilometers northwest of London, Ontario. The Donnellys were an Irish Catholic family that had settled in the area, only to have some, we'll call them disputes, go wrong for them. and which eventually led to this massacre. Now, from what I've been able to read so far, it sounds like there was quite a bit of strange occurrences or weird behaviors, even before this massacre occurred. And then after the massacre, they have said that there's actually hauntings that are still currently happening. Like, you can still find out about them if you go to the area. And they all believe it is linked to the Donnelly family and this massacre. So make sure you tune in next week to learn more about what happened, why it happened, and what the hauntings, are that they feel are still affecting people in the area. Honestly, just after some really early preliminary research of the area, because, I'm trying to avoid some of those hoaxes for you guys, it has me putting this location on my bucket list of places I want to visit in Canada in the upcoming years. It really has some interesting history and some really unexplained experiences, so you won't want to miss next week. Now stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is Katie Kulpa signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.